I am relatively new to semiotics. Well, maybe not so new since it's been almost 2 years that I hang out with you guys, but I'm still learning a lot. And so I hope I can also be of some inspiration. As mentioned, I've been into cognitive science, and since I work with the project FACETS, I've also grown more and more interested in social psychology, where the face is the queen of stimulus in lab research. It wasn't like that some time ago. But now I'd like to begin this talk with a joke that I obsessively repeat. I imagine Massimo Leone some years ago conceiving the very project FACETS and thinking about how, FACETS stands for Face Aesthetics in Contemporary E-Technological Societies. So it was probably thinking about how the deep and profound and complex and NASA-like technologies were about to develop some major modification in our facial visual culture. And then all of a sudden, a very, very small and arguably biological, non-artificial, who knows, creature, the virus, influenced our lives and modified our facial landscape with thanks to a very, very simple technology that is the face mask. And this was pretty surprising, but as we were all committed to study how technology impacted the face and the visual landscape of the face, we took this challenge, and I took it particularly at heart because I got, this is, say, my scientific king, if so we can say. So recently I've grown interested in how face masks interact with the impression of trustworthiness. And since they apparently do, albeit in non-linear and non-easily explainable terms, I'd like to make this little game and speak about fake masks rather than face mask. So let me begin with some kind of biologically inspired rhetoric. What happens when you meet a person you know? Suppose you know me. This is a nice picture from when I was younger and more beautiful. And you know me for a lot of time. You know that I am the kind of nerd who can buy the Barbie on Amazon, and first thing, you see that there is a face. We automatically see that there is a face whenever we see some triangle shaped shape in the environment, and we can have face pareidolia whenever an object resembles these three red dots in the environment. Whenever we detect a face, without even asking our permission, our cognitive machinery begins to trigger some processes like, let's see who this guy is. And unless we suffer from prosopagnosia, like the psychiatrist Oliver Sacks described and suffered himself, we will say, oh, this is Marco Viola, the nerdy guy from FACETS team. And as soon as you recognize it, even without noticing it, perhaps it's all pre-conscious, you restore a lot of nice or less nice memories about me, which will steer your social interactions. For instance, you don't have to speak me about face masks because I will become boring and telling you about blah, 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 blah. So you have a lot of stored information. Now, meeting people we already know was the norm for the greatest part of the Homo sapiens evolutionary history, okay? We were used to live in big tribes, and big tribes, everybody know each other, so we don't really need to face strangers. Strangers were usually food or enemy. But then at some point, civilization, of course, and then semiotics becomes possible, I guess, and then you will have to face strangers. You will have to see faces you've never seen before. So what happens? You detect the face because the stranger probably has, unless he's some kind of pirate with a patch on his eye, on her eye, you will see there's a face. So we trigger our automatic machinery for detecting who the hell she or he is, and we fail because there is no memory associated with that specific face. So how are we supposed to interact with a person we don't know? What rules, what expectations? Is there a topic we don't want to touch upon? Can she tell us direction to get to the forest to get berries? We really don't know. So we really need to rely on some impressions, some heuristics for social interaction. We might base on socio-cultural norms for what is good and what is not when we don't know somebody, or we can try, and we usually try, to infer something from their face. Now, the whole history of physiognomy can be read as the attempt to rationalize something that is indeed our instinct, okay? Even if we don't trust Cesare Lombroso or Caspar Lavater anymore, that is, we don't concede that we can infer people's mental states or enduring mental traits from the shape of their face, we still do so implicitly. How does it work? That's a major topic in social psychology. Suppose that I meet this stranger's face, I will automatically and quickly, I only need about 50 milliseconds to form some impression, and I will get the idea whether she or he is a person I can trust, a person I can make jokes with, if she is sensible to some kind of humor. Lots of impressions I will have, fallible as it is, but still they will produce effects. And the nice thing is, if Professor Leone or someone else from my cultural group sees the same face, he or she is very likely to have similar impressions, okay? That does not mean that culture or personal history does not play a role, they do, but still there is a lot of convergence. And this convergence of impressions, that is, that me and probably most of you will judge the same faces as trustworthy or untrustworthy, are what drive the physiognomists to build up an alleged science out of it. But this is no science, because it's true, we are probably agreeing in our impressions, but we are probably making mistakes in reifying our prejudice about faces. So we can say, to paraphrase this in the framework provided out with this Nobel-winning cognitive scientist, first impressions are a system one way of doing. Daniel Kahneman proposed in this bestseller book that we have two rough ways to do things, okay? Without taking them too much seriously from the point of view of neurocognitive mechanisms, we either do things reflexively by taking a lot of time and effort, double checking, and this is the system two, the slow and very prudent one, or 99% of time, we do things out of habits, that is instinctively, emotionally, routinely, and making more mistakes perhaps because we're fast and frugal. Now, first impression are kind of system one way to build up a social interaction with a stranger, okay? The longer way will be to get information about her or him. Now, this guy, Alexander TODOROV, is probably the social psychologist who has studied first impression more in depth. He took in what is probably his most famous studies, he asked people to provide the unconstrainedly description of some faces. Like, he told to some students, how would you describe this face? Tell some adjectives. And based on these adjectives, he synthesized them in 13 broad categories, which, with some statistical machinery, might boil down in two big, broad, and relatively orthogonal dimensions. One is trustworthiness or valence, that is, does this person wants to harm me? Is she or he a threat to me? And dominance or power. Is this person capable of enacting his will to harm in case she or he does? Now, based on these two dimensions, you can tell a lot about face. And I'd like to take this recent paper from Arianna Bagnis and colleagues in Bologna, who shows how trustworthy, which is the construct, the psychological construct I want to speak about today, has effects on real life. They did a nice study because they were not in the lab. They did what they call an ecological study, that is in real life settings. And the real life was an emergency unit before COVID. And they went there and they exploited the fact that people going to the emergency unit are sorted into 4 categories. If you're evidently in a very, very bad shape, you go straight to the red, you get the red card and you skip any triage. Otherwise, a nurse will make a triage to you and assign you to a code, and people with a yellow code have shorter waiting time than green and even more white codes. Okay, if you go there for no reason, you'll get a white code like it. This in theory, but in fact, what they did is to ask some nursery students to rate during the triage the faces of 200 persons going into the emergency units on 4 dimensions. We focus on trustworthiness. They ask how trustworthy is this face, from 1, not at all, to 9, very trustworthy. We'll give them the keys of my house. And they, unsurprisingly, they found out that trustworthy faces, together with distressed faces, but yeah, that's not surprising, are more likely, ceteris paribus, to get more serious evaluation. So, in a nutshell, to put things brutally, if you look like a thug, like a bad-looking guy or girl, you're more likely to see your medical condition underestimated. So, impressions of trustworthiness produce effects, and these effects can make the difference. Now, what happens when we don't see faces, but we see masked faces? This changes a bit of things. And scouting the literature, I've seen some stuff that says so. So, for instance, this Colombian researcher, Antonio Rivera La Rosa, who will also be our guest in September, October, found out that in Colombian people, during COVID pandemic, people with a mask were perceived, ceteris paribus, more trustworthy than people without masks. Surprisingly, more recently, this German paper found the opposite pattern. This might be strange. You might say, why people are deemed less trustworthy when they wear a face mask? But if you look into the paper and not only read the abstract, as I sometimes do, you find out the reason. The reason is that they wanted to get subjects who are very distressed, very skeptical about the seriousness of COVID, and very distressed by face masks. So they were mostly psychiatric patients. So it turns out that when you have distress with mask and you're relatively unaffected by COVID, like it's all a fake news and so on, you're more likely to judge people with fast face masks like unreliable. But the opposite is observed in the few people that are relatively take COVID seriously, and that does not see face masks as a threat to their freedom and so on. So there is a cultural effect, of course. Again, thanks to the support of the FACETS group, I put together a team of psychologists myself, and we also investigated the impact of face masks on emotion and trust attribution. And we found out, to make a long story short, that if you've got an angelic, trustworthy face, adding a mask will not change a lot. I mean, you will still look relatively reliable. If you add a mask to an untrustworthy face, on the other hand, they will look like medium in level of trustworthiness. It's okay. And the fun fact, if you add the transparent mask, they stand in the middle, like not really so devilish, nor really so medium, in the middle. So why do I care about this? Because recently, my colleague and former Fabio Paglieri, a psychologist and a former PhD student colleague of Massimo, had this nice idea. He claimed, look, guys, how does these effects of masks and of faces themselves affect the credibility of sentences? I mean, we see a lot of physicians on the TVs and politicians, and everybody make a lot of scientific claims of several kinds. Do we trust people with masks on their face more or less? So we devised this little experiment that we are trying to turn into a paper right now. We took 32 faces that looked reliable and 32 that looked devilish and trustworthy. And half of them were for one gender, half for the other. We avoided non-binary faces because they would make the analysis more complex, unfortunately. And then we had them, we sort them with each of them was paired with a scientific sentence, like the moon is distant from the earth like more than 300,000 kilometers, or with a scientific explanation, which is the hair becomes white because of blah, 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 blah. And we sort out for fields, humanities, history, geography, art science, life science. And then we found some participants, 159, and asked them some simple questions, like sorry, just a moment, because the people here are going crazy. They were fighting outside of my window, which I had to close. So people were asked which of these facts are more reliable. And then the other half of the subjects saw the same faces, photo edited by our colleague Roberto Camponi, to have face masks. And to them we asked who you deem more reliable. So to cut a long story short, what we found was that the impressions of faces bias their judgment. That is, we didn't care about whether people actually recognized true or false sentences. We did not care. We were interested in whether reliable faces biased people in believing the scientific facts that they told, and they do. Okay, so apparently trustworthy faces in blue push people to respond, yeah, it might be true, a little more than the unreliable faces. It's only 10%, but it's a lot in psychology. It's good. The nice thing then is that when you mask the face, that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, you can see that the right spot on each graphic is more or less they are the same. I mean, they are 50-50. So whatever effect prompts people to believe or to disbelieve a given face seems to be deactivated when this person wears a mask. We also expected other effects to prompt, like if a person wears a mask, then he will see a doctor, and so his evaluation of life science will be more reliable. And we didn't find anything like that. But this effect was really interesting and a bit surprising. We had to reason a bit. Why does this happen? So we might simply explain it by saying, look, you don't formulate a judgment of how trustworthy a faith is when there is a mask. But this was not totally convincing. I mean, it's not like we don't have information to assess whether to trust or not. Why? Because in the second part of the experiment, we asked people to assess. We show some of the faces that people have seen before and ask them what is explanation or sentence correct, incorrect, or in midway. And then we did, and of course, with people who saw masked face, we asked the same. What we were looking for was whether people with masked face, when asked explicitly to evaluate the trustworthiness of that face, and now trustworthiness is not just something they can use to assess the sentence. Trustworthiness becomes something they have to assess explicitly. In this case, people tend to trust to give the same result. Okay, so they still judge trustworthy faces as more trustworthy despite the face mask. So the information was still there behind the mask, and what happens is just that the mask make it less salient, less available. So when we can use our memory, knowledge, or some first impression, some system one heuristic, we choose with the mask, we rather choose to choose the more prudent long way. Okay. In the meantime, people are shooting outside. So if I get caught by a bullet, I'd love you. In a way, yeah, what I'm saying is that face mask might prompt us to do the system to kind of reasoning that, at least in some case, it's advisable. Now, when you think about the experiment from before, I could not help asking whether during COVID times, when people joined the triage room with a mask on their face, is it likely that a person who used to be judged as devilish and so his medical condition was underestimated could now be taken more seriously? And that's something I've been speculating about for a bit. And in this final part, I do have 3-4 minutes still. I'd like to
go ahead.
To propose this reflection to you. It might be a bit provocative and a bit of self-interest, because I've so much amount of knowledge about face masks, and I didn't even manage to publish all that I'd love to. And I'm crazy about the idea that we are abandoning face mask before. I mean, whatever. But I'm glad about this, because in next week in Italy, we will join France in having the no mandatory mask in public. Okay, so we'll walk in the streets with our bare faces as we used to do just 2 years ago. Or, but well, the fact is that you will also find somewhere some person who are willing to keep their face mask on, or at least to see the possibility to keep the face mask on, like it happens in some Asian countries. And this article from The Guardian was really, really impacted me, because these journalists in San Francisco interviewed people, and they told, look, I like face mask. I was not used at first, but now I can scoff, I can scold, I can make a lot of facial expression. People won't judge me. I receive less catfishing. I can do more flirting with my eyes too, because they won't recognize me perhaps. But I like this stuff. I like this new way, this negotiation of what is intimate and what is not. So now that I have to remove face mask in public, I feel like I have to remove my bra, perhaps. And so my proposal, my provocation here, and I love to discuss it with you a bit, is now trying to put my results from psychology to the test of semiotics. I've been browsing a bit in Massimo Leone's publications from some years ago, and he remarks that nudity, being nude or covered, is obscene or not, depending on the cultural code of some community and on the content, of course. So, for instance, some days ago, we were all amused and laughed a lot in Italy because this girl got naked and make a bath in the fountain in front of the Italian parliament. And this was a real good news for laughing and to make some clickbait and some fountain bath. Well, whatever. This will not even be a news if we were an indigenous community living in a pluvial area in a tropical jungle where nudity is the norm, okay? So by saying these, I'm implying that some parts of our body are to be covered by default unless we are in intimacy. Some parts are to be left uncovered, and then there is a gray zone that we can choose to cover or not. For instance, I've got my neck uncovered, my hands and arms uncovered, and it's okay. It's nothing. If I wear without this shirt, it might have been a little unpolite. Okay. The fact is that while again Massimo told us about before it was mainstream that the face mask used to be rather vanilla, okay, in Asian countries, whereas to us it was inconceivable that the face could have been mandatory to be covered part of the body. So what people from the Guardian interview asked was just that the face might be a gray zone, which you can decide to cover or not. But in Western culture, following Massimo, we have a prejudice against this. So let me play the devil's advocate, and in specifically, let me say, based on what I mentioned before, that is that by covering a part of our face, we can avoid others to judge us out of their prejudice to some faulty first impression that we might want not to trigger. I dare say that we should liberalize the face mask for those who want. And to do so, we have two challenges to overcome. The first one is this cultural challenge I've just described. Okay, so if someone has someone wears airglass, they are cool because they are socially accepted in our culture, albeit they cover the face and prevent identification even more than face masks do, actually. But when I spoke with the barmaid who always make my coffee in the morning near the office, and I was telling her about my research, she told me, you know, I always wear my shades. I feel almost naked without them in public. Okay. And now that I have the face mask, the same applies for the face mask. I'm so sorry that I have to abandon it. I don't want to give my face. I'm paraphrasing, but the point was something like, I don't want to give my face to stranger, just like I don't want to give you my naked back unless I know you very well and we are on very friendly terms. And there is then a second, an alleged legal resistance that is indeed a cultural one, perhaps, because we were against covering of the face due to religious reasons, like in the Muslims' niqab, but we're perfectly fine when it comes to covering the hair, the eyes, and the face mask. And countries like France and Italy, who have strict legislation on prohibiting the use of mask without any good reason, could now put the same restriction on people who are willing to wear masks. So I will let you with this hope. I'd be an advocate also for my personal interests, said this, to write my publication and be recognized of an expert of something that is actually employed in real world. But I think there are also some really good reasons to allow people who wants to keep part of the face covered to do so. And I'd like to know your opinion about this, because we know that some philosophers has argued that these will be rather unpolitical and we will give up on our identity. But I mean, I'm speaking with semiticians, so I hope this proposal might trigger some more interesting reflection than that. Thank you very much.